All right. Good morning, everybody. How you doing this morning? This is the Brothers Podcast, and we're back. We are extremely back. We super excited about being back and really getting to our flow, what we do, being able to talk about diverse content and really bring something truly to the listening audience that's going to resonate, that's going to help you think, that's going to move you to the next level of purpose, move you to the next level of thought, change, action, change agents. And so this morning, we just want to rise together this morning. And so it's going to be an off the chain show. It's going to be an amazing show. Today we're talking about two different Americas. Can you believe that? Two different Americas, and can we survive it? Now, most people would think about, like, why are we even talking about this? We are in 2021. Like, this conversation should not be happening. What do you guys think about when people say, like, this conversation, we shouldn't even be having the conversation right about now? So what are your thoughts about that as we kind of jump into? So, hey, if you're jumping in on, let us know that you're here. Also, go ahead and hit the like or the share button. And so what do you guys think about that? And good morning to you, brothers.
Good morning to you, brother.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do you guys?
Hey, I'll jump in. I think we need to be very
on. Let us know that you're here. Hold on. Also, go ahead and hit the like. Go ahead. My bad. That's one of them tech issues.
No, we're good.
Go ahead.
But I think that it's important, the conversation. But in having the conversation, we must be careful that we're not so focused on the problem that we have no idea how to access the solution.
Okay.
And I know we got a problem, and we need to talk about it. I think we should be having the conversation. But my hope and my prayer is that the conversation is more solution oriented than it is lingering on something that we know exists and we need to deal with.
All right. So what do you think about that, Dr. Johnson?
So I concur with Pastor Tim. I mean, it's really, whenever you think about the concept of two different Americas, you do have the issues that we continue to currently face throughout the nation. But at this point in time, it's really, we need to have a solution-focused mindset to where we're basically creating strategies for all the different issues that are still occurring, and have a point of attack to really target those specific solutions and get that in order.
I agree with that. I think one of the things you think about is that we do need to have a solution oriented and solution focused, but I think the conversation is necessary and real. What are your thoughts on that, X, Mario?
Yeah, I agree with what the brother said. I do think that we do need to assess the problem to make sure that the solution that we're coming up with or addressing the immediate needs of the American people. So, for example, a lot of the problems that we faced in the past, we still have that are still relevant. And then we have new issues that need to be addressed. So I do think that we need to be solution focused. I just think that we need to be careful about how we assess the problems and not more so look at it as a lingering thing, but looking at and prioritizing what needs need to be met first and what things need to be addressed in a certain manner. That way we stay organized while we're trying to fix this thing that we call two different Americas.
Right. I think the controversial piece for me is that when you look at the two different Americas, there's two different varied extremes, right? So when you think about on one level what we are today in the country, and as it relates to kind of like financial, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then it comes with its different opposing sides about COVID-19, not just from a vaccination standpoint, but an economic access standpoint. You know what I'm saying? Does everyone have equal access to achieve that, right? Even from a faith standpoint, we have. Even from a faith standpoint of what side we're going to stand on. Some people say, what, I'm a fan of former President Trump. I don't need to have a president that has morals and who's not, compulsorily, telling false truths or things like that. I need someone who's going to lead, basically. And so his moral fiber, his moral character about who he is has nothing to do with him standing or his position in the office. And so a lot of people still have that perspective when it comes to politics. What?
Are we here already?
We going everywhere, brother. So I'm just setting the stage, man. And so when it comes to that, when it comes to politics, and when it comes to education, you see the two different extremes, and then you see the educational disparities, and that still lies in education. I think, and even COVID-19 really showed education and how it's the education disparity, because you had a lot of kids when we went virtual who didn't have access to internet, who didn't have access to laptops and technology. And so therefore districts were scrambling trying to make all these things happen. And it was a big divide, and you were able to see that divide even more so in education. So here, it's just on so many different platforms and levels. Now, do we need to be solution oriented and solution focused? Absolutely. And we got to. But I think the narrative and story that we tell is very important to improve the quality of where we are and how we move forward. And so in that, let's kick it off, Tim. Let's kick it off, Pastor Tim. So dive right on in, man.
I think we're tripping already because we didn't. Okay, so we're already thinking something immoral. He's a liar and all of that, and I mean, we're laying down. Okay, so we're laying down a narrative of a man that shows you who he is, and he's nothing different than every single president we've had. Every single one. Every single one has been a liar. Every single one has been immoral to some degree. The thing is, they covered it up better than he does. And I think this world is so hypocritical to me in so many ways. It's almost frustrating because you have men who came on the scene who supposedly we call them presidents or whatever have you, and they come on the scene and they tell you all these lies and get all these folks to vote for them. Then they get into office and do the exact opposite, and we never hold them accountable. And they give you all these false reasons why they couldn't do what they said they were going to do,
right?
And they speak presidentially and hold themselves up very well, and they're very well at telling a good lie. And then you got Trump, who comes in, who can't hide the truth. He can't hide the fact that he's egotistical, that he's arrogant. He'll lie in a heartbeat. I mean, he can't hide it. He's nothing different than what we've had for years and years and years, including Obama. Nothing different. Just my opinion.
I think go ahead, Brother X.
No, I was going to say I agree with him wholeheartedly. I think all of them have been like Trump. The only difference in Trump and looking at him and some of the rest is that he made you adjust yourself in your seat while looking at him, because he was that unfiltered. Also, I'm very cognizant that the perception that's put out about presidents or about anybody in the mainstream, we have to consider the media. They have the power to paint them in a way that they didn't. So I think that Trump also shaped white society as well, because now they're going at each other about their stance on this man. They're going at each other about this. Some of them agree with what he said. Some of them didn't. I think we're put at the crossroad to say that we have to keep the American people at the forefront of the discussion. So when we're talking about two Americas, we're talking about two realities in America.
Right.
You have those who are disenfranchised, and then you have those who may not have that same background. And so when we look at that, he's right. I mean, we've been fed, the American people have been fed a reality that is comfortable, because I don't think even leadership know what they're doing at this point. I think that they're scrambling to try to figure things out, because now you're seeing other nations wanting to be self-dependent, wanting not to have to rely on leadership from America, partnerships with America. And so these other nations are bringing in and looking at different currencies now on how they can be self-independent, so that they can make sure that the security of their communities are at the best interest. And so I think we're just at a crossroad, and I definitely think, and I agree with what the brother said. The American people have been lied to. We'll be able to make the most progress when we have the most truth being told. And sometimes we have to tell that truth to ourselves and not wait for the TV to tell it to us.
Absolutely.
I definitely don't disagree with that. I think one of the things that if we're talking about that the American people and it needs to be put out front, but I think one of the reality is I think that even my brothers and sisters, and so me talking about President Trump is kind of shed into light what people think there's as it relates to two different Americans and what people's perception is and what people believe. The part is that we have to but so I want to ask this question. Let me go back to a comment you had made about the different disenfranchised. So some people's perception is in America that there is no disenfranchised, that everybody can be raised up by their own bootstraps, that we all have equal footing and equal access. And so in that, then why do we talk about two different Americas? Because it's not two altering different realities. There's only one reality. And that reality is that you have the ability to be everything and anything you choose to be and do. And so therefore they don't have that sense of perspective that there's two different Americas. They see one America, and then we should be everybody has equal footing. And why are we not there? So don't talk about race, don't talk about politics or different side and views of that, because it shouldn't be.
Not to love, that's a false assumption that's being played out throughout time.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, you have a situation. I'm sitting here taking notes. Whenever you really consider the whole perspective of two different Americas, you can essentially equate that equation to the people in power versus the people not in power.
Gotcha.
And when you look at all the different concepts that you mentioned, whether that be financial, race, how we respond to COVID-19, politics, access, and education, when you think about the power versus not in power concept, it's so many factors that tie into that I mean, the reality is we do have two different Americas. And just because it's a situation in which you may have individuals who have equal access while they're coming up, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's equitable access. Some
Correct.
people need different resources depending on where they may live or what type of education they may have or how they've been brought up. You know, you have to look at a broad spectrum of what it's going to take to survive within these two different Americas.
I agree with him wholeheartedly and well said, brother. Because when you think about persons that are saying, you know, disregard race or disregard those different things, if we disregard those, then we are neglecting accountability as it relates to how we're addressing some of these issues for the most part. And again, because when you look at the accountability, America, where it is now, has a historical background that is attached to it. You can't neglect that. So now you get into the critical race theory where you're saying, okay, we need to, or they're going to try to make sure that certain things are not taught. Well, that's not going to play in the best interest of those whose history is being neglected out of it. So I think that he's totally right. It's a false narrative. I think that we have to, and for us, like I've been saying, for us to really address the problem, we have to assess the problem, look at it. And what I think Brother Tim said is not necessarily look at it as complaining, but we're assessing it to say, okay, we need to address poverty, we need to address academics, we need to address the prisons, we need to address the community, we need to address all of these different issues. I think just for a long time that we have been waiting on different things to solve our problems rather than us solving our problems ourselves. I think that that's the crossroad that we're at, that we're going to have to use our best interest to now kind of do what's best for ourselves and our families and our communities throughout America, for everybody.
Absolutely. Pastor Tim, what's your thought on that?
Well, I believe in what I call the pivot and change theory.
Okay.
Pivots and change. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of times we're trying to address a problem and we have no one in power that will allow us the opportunity to initiate what is necessary to fix the problem. And so when we in that position, What you have to do is you've got to pivot. I had a job years ago, and the manager over me was an obvious racist. I mean, just terrible, and everybody knew it. But his family member was in power somewhere up higher up in the executives or whatever, and he just never lost his job, stayed in his position. I knew that. Right. So everybody was trying to address him and address what he was doing, but there was no one in power to hold him accountable properly. Mm-hmm. So when the issue came toward me and I knew it was coming to me, the moment the issue came to me, I didn't address it. I didn't say a word. I just finished doing my job. I was effective at my job. And because I was effective at my job, the assumption was I'm on their side. Mm-hmm. I never gave them the impression, never laughed in their face, didn't giggle at them, none of that. Just did my job. And so that made them feel like I've got to be on their side. He's saying nothing about an obvious disgrace. After I did my job and began to become promoted and went up 3 different levels, when I got to the level that was outside of his circumference and I was able to handle things differently, I put people in position over him that would hold him accountable to what I knew he was doing. Right. And when I put those people in position, then I dropped back and I addressed the issue. Because now I have somebody in position that can hold him accountable with the problem that I know exists. I think sometimes we need to just pivot. We waste time trying to, that these people over here are not going to deal with the issue. They're not going to deal with the problem. And you can scream to the hill, they're still not going to deal with it. Until we start repositioning ourselves and then start putting people in position that can hold other people accountable, then we can go back and properly address the problem.
So you make a critical point when you're talking about the pivot change theory that you got. I like that. I like the pivot change theory and how we need to pivot and really address and not really focus in on the problem, but I guess in a sense being solution oriented. And how do we change that narrative and being solution oriented? I think the key things is how do we get people to become that though? So historically, you've been trained and you've been raised for this for so long, right? How do we move people, ignite a fire, to call to action, to say, now it's time to pivot. Now it's time to change. Now it's time to come together. How do we do that? Becomes the critical question.
I think you have to continually look into the exposure piece. I mean, whenever you're either at work, at church, no matter what type of situation you may be in, you need to have those conversations with those around you. And sometimes those conversations with those around you need to be more focused on people who don't look like you. I mean, of course, when you have people who look like you, there's going to be a greater probability that you guys may think alike because you've been brought up in the same circumstances, but that's not always the case. But it's really going to take having those conversations on a daily basis with those who don't look like you, may not come where you come from, and have the same background that you have in order to get that experience of learning, hey, this is what I'm going through on my end, what's going on your end, and figuring out where we can bridge the gap in between those two circumstances.
I like that, bridge the gap. Go ahead, Pastor. You was trying to get in on that?
I was about to say, passion without thought breeds chaos every time. And so when we're passionate, we're screaming and hollering and protesting, which is sometimes helpful, sometimes not. And if we're screaming, if we got all this passion, but we have no thought, we've just created more chaos. And I think that everything's in the home. We need to start bringing up, we need to start raising thinkers, people that are strategists, kids that think about what they do, why they do it. I remember when I was young, my mom and dad brought me up, and I thank God for me up with the mindset of trying to do the right thing. And that helped me so much in life. And I'm a better person because of it. A lot of
Right.
times, God would discipline us and say, "Why? Because I said so." Well, I can't process. I can't. I don't have an understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right.
When I got a little older, my mom kind of buffed that and was like, "Okay, let me help you understand why you're doing it that way." And
Mm.
so I became a thinker, and I became a strategist, and I began to kind of understand why we do what we do. We got to start bringing up these young people in a mindset that helps them understand why this is important, why it should
Right.
be done this way. How
Right.
do we fix an issue? How do we address an issue? How do we put passion and focus it and harness the passion? Right now, we got a lot of people who are passionate and they're not thinking.
Hmm. So that gets in the way of progress. Is that what we're
It's
saying?
chaos. It's
You have to
chaos
have
every time.
you have to have a plan at the end of the day. You can't just have the thinking component.
Mm,
Right. So we.
absolutely. Think about Jesus. When Jesus went to the church, the synagogue, and they
Yeah.
were selling all of this stuff in his father's house, in our
Mm-hmm.
father's house.
Right.
He was disgusted, he was irritated, he was frustrated. And some
Mm-hmm.
people may say, "Oh, that was a moment where Jesus lost control." Absolutely not. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He knew the message he wanted to display, and he knew how he wanted to display it.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore he was turning over tables and whooping them out of the church. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
only time you see that in the entirety of the Bible. Why? Because that's the message he wanted to give, and that's the manner in which he wanted to give it. And I
Right.
agree with Dr. Antonio. We got to have a plan. We got to think it through and say, okay, let's see this thing let's see the end from the beginning, and then let's
Right.
operate accordingly. And so now when you see me acting with passion, it's not because I'm just emotional. It's because I'm with that way. That's the message I wanted to give, and I knew what would happen after I gave it.
With you on that. 100%. 100%. Anybody? X, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly to that. When I, kind of to touch back on the protest, a lot of that comes from people that feel like they don't have a voice. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they don't have a voice, they go to the means that they know that brings attention to the issues. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in a lot of times, American society fears that at well because there's a cost that comes behind that, a monetary cost when we see these different type of things happen. Again, so when I'm looking at it and I'm looking at this issue in American society we have right now, we have to teach history in its proper context. When you teach history in its proper context, what you do is you allow the people to see where they were, what happened, what went wrong, what is the effects of that, and where they
Right.
need to go moving forward. So when you look at it, again, they don't want to tell the truth about deliberate acts that have happened throughout history because there's accountability now that is going to be sought. And so with that accountability, people have to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable. And so, but again, I think that we're looking from leadership in the wrong direction. Our leadership has to come from the one whom God has given the authority to give us that leadership. It's not going to come it may not come from the government. We
Mm-hmm.
already know that that's a system set up. There are things that we're not even aware of on how things are reared in that manner that it may not come from there. And we know
Mm-hmm.
God never came from amongst, the rich. He always came from amongst the people who needed to be saving. And he raises one from amongst those people because he speaks their language. And when he's able to speak those language, the first thing he's going to do is organize them. And so
Mm-hmm.
those of us who have a certain level of education, whether it be a education from a school or a community-based education, what we need to do now is put ourselves in these different groups with our people. We understand. I know what it feels like to be voiceless. A child knows what it feels like to be voiceless. When they can't verbalize themselves, what they do, they run around the house, they stomp, they knock stuff over. They're just trying to let you know that they're dissatisfied. And I think not putting our people in the position of children, but we do the same thing. We want America to know that we are not happy under these conditions. Now we're
Mm-hmm.
coming to the point to where if you're not willing to sacrifice the ultimate sacrifice to get what it is that we say that we deserve as human beings, then why are we even here?
Right.
You know, now we have children
Right.
that are coming up behind us. This is a whole generation of people that are going to be supported by the material that we leave for them. And if we don't let them know what the problem is, they're never going to address it. They're just, so we have to teach history in its proper context.
I think so too. I think we have to teach the historical and the history in its proper context, and it's okay. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's saying that we have not moved beyond that. I think a lot of people just have. If you look recently within the Tulsa massacre, a lot of people didn't even know what happened in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They had no knowledge base of it. They had no historical context of it. It was just kind of like hearing it for the very first time. And I think, like you said, very important that we do teach it from the historical context and what it is. And that doesn't mean that it's still relevant. I mean, it's still the same today, but there's still things within that happened within that time frame that still exists today. And that's okay, though. And I think we have to be, like you were saying, as we pivot, as we change, as we get solution oriented, as we get more focused, you know what I'm saying? But there's still some hurt behind that, what happened in Tulsa. There's still some things still unresolved, unsettled from happening in Tulsa, And
I mean, think about it, Dr. Love. The reason why we have two different Americas as it is right now is because history has been his story.
Yes.
It's only been one perspective of what's going on throughout time. So if you only have one perspective of what's going on throughout time, despite all these other, incidents, massacres, reflecting on other cultures and everything else, we're talking about the concept of teaching kids as they come up.
Correct.
If they don't get that history being taught to them as they come up, they're not going to have a broad perspective because they're only seeing things through one lens.
Correct. Absolutely. So the question becomes, though, like, say, for example, they didn't know, a lot of people didn't, they were unaware of that transpired in that time frame. And so going back to X's standpoint, from the historical standpoint and the history standpoint, I think your standpoint too, it just can't be one-sided. All sides have to be told. And then when all sides are told, then we can all make informed decisions based upon what was been shared with us, correct? Would we say we could or we can't? Yes, no?
Are you talking?
Absolutely.
That's an open question, brother?
Yeah, that's an open question. Yes, I apologize.
Go ahead, Brother Tim.
No, absolutely. I think you're totally correct. Once we, partial history is dangerous history because whenever
say that
very
partial history is dangerous. It's so dangerous because we put people in a position where they can manipulate what's being shared.
Right.
And it leaves so many open doors to. There was this house we on our street years ago. I was young, much younger, and it used to be a back porch, and they knocked the whole back porch off.
Right.
And if you open the door, if you didn't know the house, if you open that back door, you literally fell about maybe 7 to 9 feet straight down.
Wow.
And it was a terrible drop. And that's what happens with partial history. When you have partial history, there are doors that people will prepare to walk through, not realizing when you open that door, there's a 9-foot drop behind it because you only told me part of the story. And so, and that's what's happening now. And that's with Black history, whatever they call it, his story, all of that. Because when you exclude the Bible, the Word of God, from true history, you have really killed the reality of the whole story. And so we got to get to a place where we stop talking about Black history, white history, Asian history, all of that, and start saying, what is the history of mankind? And we all came from one man. And so when we start seeing it from that way, we'll get away from race and all of that. We'll start looking at the truth, which is good and evil, right and wrong, bad and good. That's really what it comes down to.
I think, but let's push in on that, because I think the other part of that is, man, that we do have that. They do understand bad and good, and so even in understanding bad and good, if we understood that to the fullest piece right there, we wouldn't even have slavery, though, bro. You wouldn't even have people that were enslaved and treated unfairly. So the word of God has always been here. It ain't just got here or just arrived. It's always been here. So we can't say that if we just do this, then it's that, not that. I think that's what we're coming up. I think that people have to buy into, or really be, coming to relationship with God, to really begin a heart change, and that begins people's change in mindset and perspective. But to me, the word of God has always been here, and that's always been truth. And yet we still had what we had. You know what I'm saying? Yet we were still enslaved, and that you still have indigenous people. Yet you still have an inequality. Yet you still have all of these things, even with the word. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. And so, even with that being said, then, so the question, so how do we begin this narrative? And I go back to the narrative and the pivot and change narrative, because I like the pivot and change. I'm about to use that one, brother, more often. How do we begin this process of pivoting in reality of two different Americas, and uniting people and bringing people together to understand that the ideologies that we all share in common are the same? When you think about what we all want is love, acceptance, to live in a peaceful neighborhood, all the things. How do we pivot and change that mindset from the reality of what two different Americas, portray, or the reality of that, and bring it to one?
It starts with a self-assessment and what you're doing with your families at home. I mean, that's your foundation. Depending on yourself and what's being taught in your homes is ultimately going to have a reflection of what then goes out into the community.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to add to that. And I think it starts with a community. Mr. Farrakhan teaches self-development is the basis for community development. Yeah. And so again, America is filled with beliefs and persons from different walks. We all want a quality of life. But as I speak, let's say we speak particularly to the Black or African American community. For us, we have to assess it based on where we're coming from. There's a lot of trauma that we still have on us. There's a lot of economic downfalls that we still battle with. But I think that we would be in a better situation if we started to do a little bit more for ourselves, in the manner that we don't have to depend too much on other communities to do that. And so if we're able to educate our children on business, if we're able to understand real estate, if we're able to have open dialogues about belief and being able to coexist amongst one another, right, and be able to have this discourse and being able to take the best parts of those beliefs and establish those things in the community, and we'll be able to teach our own history and say, hey, this is where you're from, this is where we are, and know that it's a beautiful culture. Now that when we're here, we don't feel inadequate, because regardless of what happens, we still have an identity. And I think that we should still work to keep that identity as we look to bring this thing all together. But I think most importantly, especially speaking for Black people, I would love to see us have grocery stores and food marts and malls that we can take those monies and develop in our own community, to where we have the financial support to put people in office that we want to see. We can help them at a local government level and on a national government level. But if we don't have a common unison amongst us as people and people at large, then we're just going to be waiting for somebody else to appoint somebody for us, and they may have their own best interests at heart than the best interests of the people, I believe.
Yeah, and to touch on Brother X's statement, we can't really, deny the importance of that political piece. And in the political piece, we have to ensure that we have spiritually minded individuals who we're trying to get into office, who understand the importance of that spiritual guidance versus their own self-interest.
Good point, brother. Very good point.
Now, I would
But
just
aren't we adapting?
go ahead. Go ahead, Aubrey.
I'm
What
sorry
now?
about that.
Now, go ahead, Pastor.
But aren't we adapting what made those who harmed us in the past strong, and now utilizing that to make ourselves strong, which in turn encompasses the cycle of division?
And what manner you mean by that, beloved?
Yeah.
Because I hear black, 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 black. And I get it. I get it. I know we've gone through a whole lot as a race of people, but we live in a place now where if we create an atmosphere that is pro-black, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
if we create that particular atmosphere, we've now alienated those people who are actually like-minded. And I just believe that I think that we can adapt the mentality of the oppressor to stop being oppressed. I believe that we need to adopt a new mentality that says, wait a minute, I'm not trying to continue this mentality of division. My
Right.
mentality is, who is like-minded? Who thinks like I think? Who's
Mm-hmm.
trying to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish?
Right.
You, roll with me. You know what I mean? And we're going to create an atmosphere for like-minded people. And because I can't, I've been hearing that for years, and I get it, I know those who have oppressed us look a certain way. And so it's pushed us to a mentality of saying, hey, the only way we're going to be able to survive is if those who look like me come together and we unify and we start doing things for ourselves, with ourselves, and doing this and doing that. I get it. But that's the same mentality our oppressors had. And if we take that same mentality, it'll definitely make us stronger. It'll definitely give us the same power that it gave them. But it'll also continue the level of division that has harmed not only communities, but this entire country. We've got to
But I
get to a
think,
place where we adapt a whole different mentality
Could
and
I
saying,
respond to
I'm
that?
grabbing for those who are like me,
Right.
not necessarily looking like me.
Right. And so again, brother, I think and thank you for that comment. And so in the language do for self, it doesn't mean that you don't coordinate or you don't do things with like-minded people. It just, again, when the history of us is so minimized because a lot of us feel like we've heard it for so long, but we haven't heard the effects. We've heard of the acts, but we haven't heard of the remnants of the effects of it. We built institutions for years based on 400 years of slavery, where there was no economic profit or gain. There are black families that are
Mm-hmm.
destroyed because we were made into animals. And when the written statement of you're free has been put in front of us, all of the pain and the suffering and all of that stuff is swept under the rug. And it's like, okay, now go and be productive, and not understanding what psychologically happened. So when we say do for self, we're not saying that we don't want to work with like-minded people. Even with doing that, the Asians are going to go and make sure that their communities are safe and that they have what they need for their people. And that is a human trait. That is okay. Same thing for the whites. We're saying we're going to do it, but we're not saying that we want to do that at the expense of not allowing other people to have that same luxury of life. We're not doing it by trying to hurt anybody. We're just saying that the grocery stores, can we own them? The hair parlors, can we own them? The land, can we own it? The homes, can we build them? These people are people, if they're welcome to come into our community, they're welcome to come into our community. But the people who live here, we profit from what comes out of community building, which is economic support. Again, we still have to eat, we still have to clothe ourselves, we still have to produce, and we can do all this coming together. But if somebody else has to think about what we're going to eat for that day, and we're not able to even do that for ourselves, we're going to still be at a disadvantage because we're going to be crippled because we have not done for self. Now, it's not a matter of separating and we don't want to deal. And no, that's not logical. We live on a planet with different human beings. You know what I'm saying? So coexisting amongst each other is great, and I think that it will happen and it should happen. but we are in a very unique situation as Black people because of our history.
Yep.
A lot of people have not had to undergo this history where there's, all right, so even Tulsa, the Black people of Tulsa didn't decide that that history wasn't going to be taught. Somebody else decided it. And now, over 100 years later, people are saying, oh, for real, that happened? Because it wasn't taught. And so again, I definitely appreciate your comments, but I do think that we have to do something for ourselves. And it doesn't mean at the exclusion of not allowing people to help us. It just means that we have to be at the forefront of our own salvation with God in mind.
Gotcha. Dr. J, you was Johnson, you want to
No, I concur with Brother X. I mean, it's whenever you look at our culture, I mean, even across the United States, we don't have, you can almost go into every major city within the United States and you have specific cultural sections of each cities that are thriving based on a population of a certain ethnicity,
Right.
except our people. You know, so it's not necessarily us operating in silos, as Brother X mentioned, is really, you know, ensuring that we have our support systems in place as well, while we're also still interacting with the other cultures, because once again, it is a huge planet and we have to coexist to support each other. And that's what a higher spiritual being's whole purpose is for all of us as human beings as is.
Mm. And again, brother, and well stated, and I believe that we're all on the same page. Sometimes, like even for me, I have to get clarification, or I'll carry on without really knowing the point. And so when you have persons that are in our community and they're only really here for economic gain, they don't live here, we have to address that and say, okay, now we have to start looking at the educational paradigm and say, okay, what comes out of community building? Security comes out of community building.
Mm-hmm.
We can do more for ourselves. Right now, people are looking at the American government and saying, what are we going to do? Even when you think about President Biden, he immediately signed an anti-Asian bill, right, during the pandemic, but there has not been one for the brutalities and murders of Black men. The reason I say Black, brother, because I'm Black. I have to address our problems first. And then those of the Asian, those of the Pacifics, they have those persons from their communities that address their problems as well. And then we all come together and see what's best for all of us. But as a Black man, I have to look at and address our problems first, because that's the reality that I have to wake up with and deal with every day. And so I think the main portion of it is freedom for everybody, a complete freedom, justice for everybody, regardless of class, creed, or color, and equality, that whoever needs help gets help immediately and they get help first. So when you think about that, and if we can put that at the forefront of our mind, that we want every human being to have the best quality of life,
Right.
that is the responsibility of the people. But it has to be rooted in God. It has to be, or otherwise it's not going to work.
True. I think in a sense, as you kind of add to kind of this perspective is that, you know, and I will kind of share that. I do believe that God, he's no respective person. And so he's not about color. And so he sees us all the same. I definitely understand that. I definitely understand that we serve a God that that's for everybody, and everybody has equal access and footing to that, to who he is, and truth in all regards. I think one of the things that we say, like as it relates to, you know, helping and supporting in community, I think it does not necessarily, we are helping supporting community. And I think we do have to raise each other up in community and help each other in community. And sometimes those communities don't look a representative of everybody in that in America. It's only one race or one particular culture in that community. But I do believe the historical context of who we are, what we've become, what we've been through is definitely necessary to tell the story. It's definitely necessary to tell the narrative, because I do believe we stand on the footsteps of that rich history, right? We wouldn't be here today without that rich history. And so I think it should be shared. It should be articulated. It should be told from both sides, both all angles, because it's the fabric of who we are in this country. And we can't step away from that narrative. We can't push away from that narrative. We can't push away from those concepts, those ideas of what we have or what we would be, what we were. And so it becomes the fact of what we're becoming now. And I truly believe that we got to be able to, exercise that right in that in the storyline, because it's critical. Because if kids never heard about the historical concept of where we come from that look like you and I, or they never heard about the Native Americans and what they endured, if they never heard about how these people suffered, it leaves out only one side, right? Mm-hmm. And all sides tells the whole entire story. And so we need that equal footing to be able to help people to jump over the bridge and over the hump and do for self and become self-reliant and become motivated and to get activated into change and process, right? So I think it all adds to the sum total. But to Pastor Tim, I think, I do agree that we serve a God that doesn't see respect of person of color. You know what I'm saying? He's God. And I do believe that we should all live in that inclusivity, peace. And I wish that one day that we will all get there. And that's the hope and intentionality that we all get there, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can all say that we can all agree that we should all get there. And so if you think about that, even if you think about Sunday is the most segregated day. You go to a white church, when you go to a black church, Asians go to an Asian church, and everybody represent Hispanics or Latinx go to their respective church. It's and everybody is in their own space, and you do have those multicultural churches. But we think about Sunday, we think about faith, we think about religion. It is the most segregated day that in America, which is that Sunday, and then we come together Monday through Saturday, right? But Sunday everybody go do that. But I think we need to raise a beyond that and do begin to mesh in multiculturalism and churches and congregations, because that's where we exchange ideology, that's where we exchange ideas, and that's where we begin to see each other in true sense of who we are. In mind, body, and spirit. And so we get a chance to see each other and have conversations and dialogue to move this narrative, to move to your point, Pastor Tim, the change narrative, man, the change in pivot theory. And I think that's when we begin to pivot and when we begin to change is through those types of crucial conversations and dialogues.
If I could, brother, now that I've matured some, mm-hmm. I have no problem with that on Sundays. If I live in this community, and I decide, and if I'm going to church in this community, when someone else visits this community and visit that church, they can say, wow, this is a great culture that these people have. Mm-hmm. And so I do think we should be able to embrace and to explore and see the different cultures that we all have. But, I don't see nothing necessarily wrong with it. I think what's wrong with it is if we go into these different belief in places, and then it makes us have a slanted eye for those who may not believe the same. And so now that's more separatist than just going to the building, because you leave with an ideology that will kind of limit your willingness to interact with different persons. And so, for example, I think that, when someone comes to the community, they should feel safe. They should see the beauty of our culture, and not just teaching history from the horrific part, but about the inventions that we've done. Mm-hmm. Because that will give us confidence that we can do it again. Mm-hmm. To see, and that's why that's why I say it has to be told in its proper context. See, when people tell our history, it's in a movie, but we never see the profit. We get the movie, but when the movie's off, we don't get the profits. And mm-hmm. So I think that we now have to just be a little bit more transparent about how we're moving forward in this generation in time.
Gotcha.
And sometimes, Dr. Love, I don't necessarily think the church piece, in terms of that being almost most separated day of the week, a lot of that comes down to the neighborhoods where the churches are located as well. A lot of people, touching on what Brother X said, if there's a church around my corner and I live in a predominantly African American community, it may be a situation in which it's easier for me to go to this particular church versus going all the way across town to another church.
Mm-hmm.
But we said that's preference, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm choosing that preference. But then I think what I say to that though, if I choose to say, hey, I want to grow across town to somewhere else, I just think I do believe that what you're saying in preference. I got you on that note. I just think there has to be a unifying piece, a unification piece in that we extend across that we extend across to each other and from all different races. And I think that's when the melting pot really begins to evolve, and exchange of ideas and exchange can happen. Because if we don't, then you're not going to know that in similarities we do believe the same. We do have the same values. The core values are still the same. You know what I'm saying? We may approach it differently, but the core values of who we are still the same. And then we can exchange in other different foods of thought. But if we don't ever come together to do that outside of, Monday through Friday, you know what I'm saying? Or like I said, Sunday being the most segregated day, then we're not going to be able to come to this, truly see God and to me in his infinite power and of all people, you know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying in that perspective. So just to kind of lend a different perspective, not a different perspective, but kind of yield more, extend more on my thought process of that.
Yes, sir.
Pastor Tim, you got something?
Oh, I'm just kind of listening to the feedback, and learned is you have a goal and you have a process.
Gotcha.
The goal, you have a journey. And the reason I can hear the brothers talk and speak and not push back on what they're saying is because I believe what they're talking about is a part of the process, is a part of the journey to get to what I hope is the real goal. And whenever you're talking about people who have been alienated, who have been left out, who have been disenfranchised, when you're talking about another goal, in order to get to the goal that I believe should be our goal, you have to address those issues along the journey, along the process. Mm-hmm. This is why a Black Lives Matter will have significance, even though I don't like some of the stuff in the background of Black Lives Matter, but the idea itself is necessary. Black lives do matter, because unfortunately, when it comes to numbers and percentages, it seems that when government looks at us in many areas, our lives have not mattered as much. And so it has significance. So on the journey, that makes sense. But if we stop at Black Lives Matter, if we stop at Asian Lives Matter, if we stop at whatever lives matter, we have totally and completely insulted the goal. And the goal is that we get to a place where literally we're able to say, who do we think alike? Let's get together and create an atmosphere where we can all thrive together. And that's where we need to be. And so I get it. Hey, if Black Lives Matter, roll with it. If it's Asian lives, roll with it. But I'm just praying that at some point we get to a place where we can come together and say, hey, let's thrive together because we're thinking the same way.
I agree. If I could, brother, Love, I didn't mean to cut you, but I mean, beautifully said, brother. And again, our people are at such a unique situation, is that it has to have a unique answer. And so, but to be honest, I heard very few people saying that in certain communities that we need to all come together. You need to come on. I heard very few, just a few of us think that way in saying that. And so, and that's not to Pastor Tim, that's just in general. Yeah. I've never heard the Asian community say we need to come together. I've never heard them say that. And I'll be thinking, I'm like, why? Because they're self-sufficient. Literally, they're self-sufficient. Their communities look like them. They've brought the culture that were from where they originate from with them. Their children feel safe. Their language is prevalent. Their God is prevalent. They understand, they may have a universal want for all to be secure, but they feel secure amongst themselves where they are, and that's fine. And so with us, we have literally been taught in a lot of cases to hate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can we get on one accord with anybody if I don't have enough strength and belief that the brother that's selling dope can be reformed, if I don't believe the sister that prostitutes or strips, that she can be reformed, if we don't believe that these things can be reformed. So the best thing for I think for us in particular, the best thing for us to do is to look at our own unique problem and then educate ourselves to solve those problems. Each and every one of us are in professions that solve problems.
Absolutely.
Especially with me being in the mental health field. And the biggest problem that I see occur are problems that we have amongst ourselves. And guess what? A lot of Black men don't go to therapy because they don't see nobody that look like them that they feel will understand. Now, I do break down that stigma. Depression doesn't have a color to it. But they want to feel that somebody knows and can feel when they say, I got anxiety about driving and I just seen a man with a knee on his neck.
Mm-hmm.
They want to have somebody that they can look across the room and say, you get it? And we say, yeah, I get it. And if we don't have ourselves in these arenas, what happens is we take them to our religions. And if even in Islam, if I'm not trained in a way to assess their problem, I'll just say God will work it out and not look at the suffering that they have to go through. So there has to be a balance. And so even I think every community needs to have the proper training on how to deal with certain issues. But I do think, Pastor Tim, slowly but surely all of us are headed in the right direction. So even at the point we're at now, God is in it. We just haven't reached a conclusion point in it, but God's in it.
And I don't, to be honest, I hear you, but I don't believe most of us have that goal, to be honest with you. I don't.
The goal
have
of
your initial goal, and that is to become self-sufficient within ourselves. I think the goal is very divisive. I believe that the desire is, yeah, absolutely. I think that everybody wants to.
Is divisive.
Absolutely. Well, no. When I now capture the fullness of my conversation, not just that moment alone.
Okay. Yes, I just
believe if you end at just the Black people being self-sufficient, it is divisive. If you end at just the Asians are currently self-sufficient, then it is divisive. Because now I've created a bubble where, yes, the dollar runs around 10 times amongst us, and we're stronger, and we're more economically balanced. We're stronger people as a people who look like us. Yes, it's stronger, but it is totally divided from everybody else. And the Asians are totally divided from everybody else. If you look at history, ain't about just Black. I mean, when you look at history, period, in the very beginning, at a place called the Tower of Babel. Before the Tower of Babel, everyone spoke the same language. When everyone spoke the same language, they were able to literally. It was a stupid idea, but it was fire. They wanted to build a tower into heaven, and because everyone spoke the same language, they built the tower, and they were actually accomplishing what they set out to do. Because when you're unified and when everyone is on the same mindset and same accord, no matter how foolish the idea, the more effective you are at making the idea come to pass. And so then, of course, to build a level of focus, a level of division came about, and now different languages, different people, etc. Well, the goal is, now that we have the level of focus that we need to have, and we understand the strength of being unified in a sect, that ultimately we would come back and say, now that we are all wise, that we are more mature, we can come back together as one and be more effective. I've been to a church, Dr. Love, to your point. I've been to a church that was extremely diverse, and it was amazing. The whole feel was totally different. I thought my black church in the middle of the woods in the country was off the chain. When I went to that diverse church, it was so refreshing. It was amazing. It's not because I hate myself. I love who I am. I love my culture. I love where I was raised. I love where I was brought up. But I understand there's more to living than just my 2 blocks of living. When I come to a place where I see cultures, I'm no longer afraid of them. I no longer have a disdain for them. And I announce, wow, whoa, they think like I think as well. This is the issue for them, like it's an issue for me. Oh, wow, and now suddenly we start to see each other differently, and we worship together, and we love God together, and man, it's a whole different feel. And I think we're missing it.
So I definitely want to say, when you go back to that piece, man, I think one of the things as an educator, and I've seen plenty of times, is when I'm working, and my whole career has been in Title I schools, and I've been in low socioeconomic schools and districts, and that's where my heart is always. And I've seen where, as kids who've never been out of the zip code that they live in many states, not even out of the zip code. So they have no clue or no cognizance of what it means to live beyond that zip code, or what's beyond their zip code, to be able to see, to even fathom what they can become. All they can see, the reality is of that it lived on TV, you know what I'm saying? Or the reality is short-lived. And so I think it's about helping us all in that awareness and growth, and moving this needle and conversation to a broader piece and perspective, so that everybody can see that, because not everybody has that level of experience outside of their current zip code. And man, it stifles, it hinders, because all you can see is that, and not beyond that, and not even have a reality of what you can become. And it's truly heartbreaking when you have those realities, and it's really 2 different factor realities. I mean, and so the limitations that they have is real, because that's what they live and breathe each and every day. And I say that to say, just to that we want the people to be able to move beyond and extend beyond and do that, I think. But at the same time, we got, like you do, is we have to open this thing up and allow people to gain varied experiences, to be able to see something different, to know something different.
Real quick, because I want to hear from Brother Johnson as well. Self-sufficiency, when explained or trying to be put across the way I'm putting it, does not exclude our working with other people. It just means that amongst Black people around the world, that we're utilizing all of our efforts to put ourselves in every avenue of human life to produce what we need as a people. So that's physical therapists, that's doctors, dentists, lawyers, judges, business owners, so that when we come to the world stage, we have what we need in the event that we don't get what we need from a government. We can do it for ourselves. We have the trades and the skills to do it. And when other people come to us, we can yield that service also to them as well. So it's really just the elevation of possibility amongst all people, but in particularly us, so that we can put ourselves in different avenues. What does it benefit if I have to go outside of my community to get physical therapy, when I got a brother here that says, I see a need in this area, I'm going to go and put myself in that area, and anybody can access that resource? Or they say, I need mental health, where you got Black kids that grew up without fathers and they gangbang, and they want to see somebody that look like them. And I see many multicultural people, but in particularly, I know for a fact that I am able to help this young man because there's a relativity that's there that'll help him feel secure enough with opening up. So I agree to disagree. I don't think being self-sufficient is divisive, because the goal is not to undermine the benefits and the expertise of anybody. It's just saying, let's maximize the potential of our community so that we can be of a service to ourselves and others.
Just for a place of clarity, For plenty of clarity, for me, I've never said that being self-sufficient is
So,
divisive. What I said was, if you're talking about being self-sufficient and you end there, then it becomes divisive. If you
Okay.
like,
Okay.
if I teach my family to become self-sufficient, it is wise. But if
right.
I end with self-sufficiency in my family and I don't teach them how to handle people outside of themselves, then it becomes divisive.
Gotcha. So hey, let's do this. So Dr. Johnson, let's move the needle of the conversation a little bit too as we kind of conclude today's conversation on two different Americas. We would like to say thank you for tuning in and thank you for being a part of the show. This show will still air. I mean, you can still go on to each of our Facebook pages and everything like that to hear the show in totality and everything like that. So Dr. J, my man. So looking at two different Americas, man, can we survive them both? What are your concluding thoughts on that?
We can survive anything with that higher power involved, plain and simple. It just comes down to working on self and working on our families so we can improve our communities and just improve our overall well-being.
Absolutely. Brother X, how can we survive it, man? Two different Americas, two different alternate stark realities. How do we do this thing, man, as we conclude out?
Yes, sir. We got to put God first. And the current state of America, if leadership in America right now is not willing to change their ways, then as it speaks in the book of Job, this, nations come and nations fall, nations are abandoned. So if we really want to get America on the right course, then what we have to do is stop assuming that we know what's best and follow the wisdom that God has given us and move forward on that.
100%, sir. Believe that. Pastor T.
Amen. Three things. Number one, trust God in everything and know that his way will always work. Number two,
Right.
you cannot have passion without thought. Passion without thought will always give you chaos. And number
True.
three, learn how to discern when you should not address the issue head on and simply pivot and change.
I like that. Number three. Good stuff, man. Hey, everybody, we are the brothers. This is our podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, same place, having a healthy debate and conversation dialogue. The great things about who we are and what we're able to do is have conversation, and hopefully that will ignite something different in you, that will ignite a thought or a process to get you changed and activated in your community, ignite a thought that will help you propel you to the next level of purpose in your life, to give you tools and tips and things to help you be a better person, to be a better you, to be the most authentic you that you possibly can be. We are the Brothers Podcast, and I want to end on this note that we all have the ability to change the face of what America looks like. The question is, are you willing? And are you willing to be a part of that change process? Are you willing to be intentional in your thought and your ways? Now, as you heard our comments today, we may not all agree on every philosophy, perspective, and all that, but that's good. That's diversity of thought. That's critical thinking, and it's best. That's us exchanging ideology. But what I will say is this: I don't believe that being to do for self is being divisive or destructive. It's just saying, hey, let's collectively work together to build each other, to help each other, to dream together, to move together, and to do everything in right. And so it doesn't mean that that is divisiveness or even self-reliant. Being self-reliant doesn't mean being divisive at all. It just means us working together, coming together, and doing for self. So I do appreciate the comments that everybody shared today and everybody did. I look forward to the same collegial atmosphere in messaging and conversation on next week. So we are the brothers, y'all. We'll see you guys on next week at 10 a.m. Central Standard Times. God bless everyone, and we'll see you on.
All right, peace, brothers. Great show.
God bless.